My name is Shirley. I am 65 years old and my occupation is a retired public school administrator. I never thought the defining moment of my golden years would involve 2 heavy black garbage bags and a cold glass of sweet tea. But there they were, tossed carelessly at my feet on the polished hardwood floors of a stunning Charlotte, North Carolina estate. Standing over me was Lauren, my son Jamal's entitled wife. Her arms crossed tight and a smug sneer painted across her face. She looked down at me as if I were nothing more than a stain on her designer rug and told me that my time as a penniless charity case was over. She practically spat the words, declaring that the mother-in-law suite was being repurposed for her own guests and I needed to be gone by sunset. She expected tears. She expected me to beg for a place to stay. Instead, I took a slow, calm sip of my tea. I reached into my worn leather handbag, pulled out an original notarized property deed, and laid it flat on her expensive entryway table. I locked eyes with her, watched all the colour drain from her face, and quietly informed her that I was the actual owner of this entire estate, and she had exactly until midnight to pack her things and get out. How did we get to this bitter end? It started with absolute trust and a mother's endless sacrifice. After my husband passed away 20 years ago, I worked double shifts at the school district just to keep our heads above water. I poured every ounce of my energy into making sure my son Jamal went through college completely debt-free. I sacrificed my own comfort, wearing the same old clothes season after season, driving the same beat-up sedan, and clipping coupons at discount stores. Everyone, including my own son, assumed I was barely scraping by on a modest retirement pension. What they did not know was that I funneled every extra dime I ever earned into quiet, smart real estate investments across the state. Because I lived so humbly, nobody suspected a thing. When Jamal married Lauren, a woman whose entire personality revolved around country club aesthetics and climbing the social ladder, I quickly realized they were drowning in debt. To help my only son, I allowed them to move into my newly acquired, fully paid-off luxury estate. We set it up to look like a rent-to-own agreement under a corporate name, so my secret wealth would remain hidden. I moved into the attached mother-in-law suite, simply wanting to be close to my 7-year-old grandson, Jordan. But Lauren saw my worn shoes and my quiet demeanor, and she immediately mistook my humility for weakness. Believing I was just a broke and burdensome guest living under her roof, she began treating me like the hired help, and I was about to discover just how wicked her intentions truly were. When my beloved husband, Calvin, passed away 20 years ago, my entire world shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. I was left alone to raise our boy Jamal in a world that can be terribly unforgiving. I had a choice to make. I could either drown in my grief, or I could wipe my tears, roll up my sleeves, and go to work. I chose the latter. I was a public school administrator by day, but I knew that salary alone was never going to give my son the life Calvin and I had dreamed of for him. So I took on extra shifts. I managed after-school programs, coordinated summer school sessions, and tutored on the weekends. I worked from the moment the sun came up until long after the streetlights flickered on. I wore the exact same sensible winter coat for 10 solid years. I cooked every single meal at home, stretching a roast chicken for days. I did not take vacations. I did not go out with girlfriends, and I certainly did not buy myself anything new. My sole focus, my entire reason for breathing, was making sure Jamal graduated from college without a single penny of debt attached to his name. And by the grace of God, I accomplished exactly that. But there was a secret I kept carefully hidden beneath my modest lifestyle. I knew that hard work alone would not build generational wealth. So I funneled every extra dollar, every tax refund, and every saved penny into real estate. I started small, buying a modest little duplex in Raleigh that had gone into foreclosure. I fixed it up with my own two hands, rented it out, and used that money to buy another property in Durham. Over 2 decades, my quiet little investments blossomed into a highly profitable real estate portfolio spread all across North Carolina. I managed it all through a private corporate entity. I never told a soul, not even my own son, because I drove a 10-year-old Honda sedan, shopped at discount grocery stores, and still clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. Jamal grew up believing I was just scraping by. He thought I was a sweet, struggling retiree living on a fixed public school pension. I let him believe that. I wanted my son to have a strong work ethic, to understand the true value of a dollar, and to never rely on a handout. I also knew from watching the world around me that visible wealth attracts opportunistic people, while invisible wealth gives you absolute power and peace of mind. That philosophy proved entirely necessary when Jamal married Lauren. From the moment I met her, I knew my son had been blinded by superficial charm. Lauren was a white American woman obsessed with social climbing country club aesthetics and maintaining a flawless image for her friends. She cared about designer labels, monogrammed hand towels, and keeping up appearances at any cost. Unfortunately, that cost was entirely literal. Barely 2 years into their marriage, I discovered they were drowning in a sea of financial ruin. They had maxed out credit cards to pay for luxury vacations, taken out massive loans for cars they could not afford, and were on the verge of eviction from a high-rise apartment they had no business renting in the first place. My maternal instinct kicked in, but I absolutely refused to simply hand them cash to squander. Instead, I devised a plan to keep a roof over their heads without enabling their reckless spending. Through my private corporation, I purchased a stunning, sprawling estate in an exclusive neighborhood here in Charlotte. I paid for it in full in cash. Then, through my lawyer, I offered Jamal and Lauren a highly subsidized rent-to-own lease agreement. They believed they were dealing with a generous property management firm. They had absolutely no idea that I was the actual owner of the property. I had only one condition for this arrangement. I told Jamal that since I was supposedly struggling on my small pension, I needed to move into the attached mother-in-law suite on the estate. The truth was, I did not care about the house or the luxury. I only wanted to be close to my precious 7-year-old grandson, Jordan. That little boy is the absolute light of my life, and I wanted to be there to watch him grow, to read him stories, and to ensure he knew the deep, unwavering strength of his grandmother's love. Lauren was furious about the condition, but given their desperate financial reality, she had no choice but to accept it. However, because she truly believed I was nothing but a penniless charity case moving in out of desperation, she immediately began treating me like an unwanted burden. In her mind, she was the grand lady of the manor, and I was just an impoverished squatter, lucky to breathe the air in her prestigious neighborhood. She assigned me the smallest parking spot in the driveway, far out of sight from her luxury SUV. She explicitly forbade me from using the main kitchen or sitting on the back patio when she had her high society friends over for brunch. She would even leave her dirty laundry and empty wine glasses outside the door of my suite, expecting me to clean up after her as if I were the hired help. I swallowed my pride entirely for the sake of my son and my grandson. I smiled politely when she made condescending remarks about my discount store clothing, offering me her cast-off sweaters as if doing me a grand favor. I stayed silent in my room when I heard her complaining loudly on the phone to her friends about the heavy burden of caring for a broke, dependent mother-in-law. I watched her parade around my property, hosting lavish parties, and boasting about her beautiful home, completely unaware that the very ground she stood on belonged entirely to me. I was paying the property taxes, covering the major maintenance, and quietly subsidizing the life she used to humiliate me. I thought my patience and humility would eventually be rewarded with basic human respect, but I was about to learn that toxic entitlement has no boundaries, and my silence was only fueling her cruelty. The disrespect did not happen overnight. It crept into my life like a slow, insidious poison, disguised at first as boundary setting, then escalating into blatant, unapologetic cruelty. Lauren moved through the beautiful spaces of the main house, with the haughty entitlement of a queen ruling over a kingdom she had absolutely no hand in building. She treated me not as the mother of the man she loved, nor as the generous benefactor who was silently keeping a roof over her head, but as an unfortunate nuisance she was forced to endure. The absolute worst of it would show its ugly face whenever her brother Travis came to town. Travis was a deeply arrogant, white American man in his late 30s, who carried himself with the unearned confidence of a millionaire, despite having a long, exhausting history of failed business ventures. From an artisanal craft brewery that went bankrupt in 6 months to a tech startup that never even launched, Travis was a walking financial disaster. Yet Lauren idolized him. Whenever Travis needed a place to crash to escape his creditors, Lauren would roll out the red carpet, and I would be promptly banished to the shadows. I remember one particular weekend when Travis came to visit. I had spent all Friday morning in my small kitchen, pouring my love into a massive pot of collard greens, baked macaroni and cheese, and golden cornbread. It was Jamal's favorite meal, the kind of soul-warming food I used to make for him when he was a boy, struggling with his college exams. I carried the heavy glass dishes across the courtyard, hoping to share a nice family dinner. Lauren intercepted me at the back door. She looked at the food, wrinkled her nose as if I were holding a plate of garbage, and blocked the entrance. She told me in a tone dripping with absolute disgust that Travis had a very refined palate and could not handle heavy, greasy foods. Furthermore, she instructed me to remain in the mother-in-law suite for the duration of his visit. She actually had the nerve to tell me that Travis needed the space to breathe without the lingering smell of old age and mothballs cluttering up the hallways. I stood there holding a tray of warm food, my hands trembling with humiliation. I looked past her shoulder, searching for Jamal. My son, the strong, educated black man I had raised to command respect, was standing right there in the living room. He heard every single word. He simply lowered his eyes, picked up a magazine, and remained completely silent. That silence felt like a physical blow to my chest, but my absolute breaking point had nothing to do with how she treated me, and everything to do with how she treated my precious grandson. Jordan was a sweet, sensitive boy who often found himself lost in the chaotic, superficial world his mother created. One bright Sunday morning, Lauren was hosting one of her lavish catered brunches on the back patio. The main house was overflowing with her high society friends. Women in pastel dresses, drinking bottomless mimosas and cackling loudly over the music. Amidst all that noise and performative perfection, nobody was paying a single ounce of attention to Jordan. The poor boy had scraped his knee on the driveway and was wandering around looking for a bit of comfort. Ignoring the crowd, he bypassed his mother and made a direct line for my suite. He knocked quietly on my screen door. His big brown eyes filled with tears, a tiny trickle of blood on his shin. I immediately scooped him up into my arms, washed his knee, put a bright bandage on it, and sat him down at my kitchen table with a plate of warm, freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. For a moment, we were just a grandmother and her grandson sharing a quiet, loving peace away from the madness. Suddenly the screen door flew open and banged loudly against the siding. Lauren stormed into my tiny kitchen, her face flushed with anger, smelling strongly of champagne and expensive perfume. She did not ask if Jordan was all right. She did not thank me for cleaning his wound. Instead, she grabbed him aggressively by his small arm, pulling him away from the table so fast he almost dropped his cookie. She glared at me with absolute venom and told Jordan that he needed to stay in the main house with the successful people. She wagged her manicured finger at his little face and told him she did not want him spending too much time in this dingy back room because she absolutely refused to let him catch his grandma's broke habits. my breath caught in my throat. I watched the fear flash in my grandson's eyes as his mother dragged him away, leaving his half-eaten cookie crumbling on the table. The sheer audacity of this woman standing on the property that I owned, subsidizing her luxury life with my hard-earned money, telling my grandson that I was a poor, bad influence. It took every ounce of my willpower not to pull the property deed out right then and there. But I held my tongue. I knew that reacting in anger would only give her the dramatic reaction she was looking for. I needed to bide my time. I needed to understand exactly what kind of snakes I was dealing with. I did not have to wait long to find out. The very next afternoon, I was out in the garden. Gardening had always been my therapy, a way to connect with the earth and find peace. I was kneeling behind a thick row of towering blue hydrangeas, carefully pruning the dead leaves right beneath the open window of the main house's study. The thick foliage completely concealed me from view. The window was propped open to let in the warm Carolina breeze, and the voices drifting out from the room were unmistakable. It was Lauren and her brother Travis. I froze, the pruning shears hovering in my hand as I realized they were talking about me. Travis was pacing the floor, complaining loudly about his latest business failure. He was whining about being practically broke, saying he needed a permanent place to stay, where he could live rent-free, while he figured out his next move. Then Lauren spoke. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, smooth, and utterly devoid of a soul. She told Travis not to worry because she had already figured out the perfect solution. She said the mother-in-law suite was incredibly spacious, completely separated from the main house, and would be the perfect bachelor pad for him. Travis laughed a short, ugly laugh and asked how she planned to get the stubborn old bat to pack up and leave. What Lauren outlined next made my blood run absolutely cold. It was a masterclass in pure, unadulterated treachery. She told her brother that she had been carefully laying the groundwork for months, dropping hints to Jamal that my mind was rapidly slipping. She planned to forge my signature on a set of medical proxy forms and secure a fraudulent evaluation from a shady doctor she knew through one of her country club friends. Her grand plan was to have me officially diagnosed with severe, unmanageable dementia. Once I was deemed legally incompetent, she would have me committed to a notoriously underfunded, state-run nursing facility on the outskirts of the county. She casually mentioned that the state facility was terrible, but it was cheap, and Jamal would not have to spend any of their money keeping me there. With me locked away and out of the picture, she planned to claim squatters' rights on the suite, or emotionally manipulate Jamal into legally seizing the property, allowing Travis to move in and live like a king on my dime. She spoke about my life, my freedom, and my sanity, as if I were a piece of trash blocking her driveway. She was plotting to strip me of my human rights, throw me into a miserable institution, and steal the very roof over my head, just to provide a free ride for her deadbeat brother. I knelt there in the damp garden soil, a heavy, suffocating darkness pressing down on my chest. I felt sick to my stomach. This was evil in its purest form. But a small, desperate piece of my mother's heart held on to a tiny shred of hope. Jamal. Surely my son would never allow this. Surely the boy I had worked double shifts for, the boy I had raised to be a man of integrity, would hear of this madness and put an immediate stop to it. He would protect me. As if on cue, I heard the study door open. Heavy footsteps walked into the room. It was Jamal. I held my breath, gripping the cold metal of the pruning shears so tightly my knuckles turned grey. I prayed to God with everything I had. I prayed for my son to raise his voice, to kick Travis out of the house, to scold his wife for even daring to speak my name with such wickedness. I waited for the righteous anger of a son defending his mother. Lauren immediately shifted her tone, putting on her best distressed, overwhelmed wife performance. She started crying fake tears, complaining to Jamal about how exhausted she was, how my presence in the suite was bringing down her mental health, and how she just wanted their family to be happy and stress-free. She gently pushed the idea of the state facility, framing it as the only safe option for my declining mind. I waited for Jamal to shut it down. I waited for him to tell her she was crazy. Instead, a heavy, tired sigh drifted out of the open window. My son. The center of my entire universe, the boy for whom I had sacrificed my youth and my body, spoke in a weak, cowardly whisper. He told his wife that he was just so tired of the constant fighting. He did not defend my honor. He did not question her medical claims. He simply capitulated to her cruelty to buy himself some peace. He said, "And I will remember these exact words until the day I take my final breath. If it means you will stop stressing Lauren, we will do the paperwork next week." My heart did not just break in that moment. It shattered into dust. The pain that ripped through my chest was so intense, so violently agonizing, that I literally fell forward, my hands sinking deep into the wet dirt of the flower bed. My own son had just agreed to throw me away like a broken toy. He had just signed my life away to a miserable institution just to keep his wicked wife from throwing a tantrum. I knelt there in the dirt, gasping for air as hot tears streamed down my face. I wept for the son I had lost, not to death, but to greed and cowardice. I wept for the beautiful family I thought we were building, but as the tears hit the soil beneath my hands, a profound and startling transformation began to take place within me. The agonizing, suffocating grief suddenly stopped. It evaporated, replaced instantly by a sensation I had never felt before. The warm, nurturing heat of motherly love was completely extinguished, and in its place rose a cold, calculated, and deeply protective fury. I slowly pushed myself up from the dirt. I wiped the soil from my knees and the tears from my cheeks. I looked at my hands. The hands that had scrubbed floors, typed endless reports, and worked tirelessly for 45 years. I was not a broke, defenseless old woman waiting for the end of her days. I was a self-made millionaire, a property owner, and a woman who held the absolute power to destroy their entire fraudulent reality with a single piece of paper. They thought I was a helpless sheep ready for the slaughter, but they were about to find out that they had just awakened a sleeping lion. I gathered my gardening tools, stood up perfectly straight, and walked back to my suite. I was not going to cry anymore. I was going to war. I remained on my knees in the damp garden soil, long after Jamal's cowardly footsteps faded down the hallway. The heavy summer heat of North Carolina pressed against my back, but I felt absolutely nothing but a freezing, undeniable clarity. For a few agonizing minutes, I had allowed myself to shatter. I had allowed the hot tears to fall for the son I thought I had raised, the boy who used to hold my hand on the walk to church, the young man whose college tuition I had paid with the sweat of my own brow and the ache in my own bones. But as the moisture soaked into the earth beneath my palms, the blinding sorrow evaporated. It was replaced instantly by a quiet, calculating stillness. I did not storm into the main house. I did not scream. I did not throw pots against the wall, and I certainly did not confront them. I relied on the deep, unspoken wisdom of the strong women who came before me. My own grandmother used to tell me that when the enemy is busy digging a deep pit for you, you do not interrupt them. You simply step aside, stay completely silent, and watch them fall in. She always said not to let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That was exactly how I was going to handle Lauren Travis and my deeply disappointing son. I slowly pushed myself up from the dirt, brushed off my bruised knees, and walked back into my mother-in-law suite. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, watching the dark soil spiral down the drain, and with it went every last drop of blind maternal devotion I had left for Jamal. From this second forward, he was no longer my precious little boy needing my protection. He was a grown man who had actively chosen to be a willing accomplice in my destruction. The very next morning, while Lauren was out getting her nails done, and Jamal was at his corporate office, I picked up my phone and made a call to Mr. Harrison. He is a brilliant, fiercely loyal attorney who has managed my private estate, my corporate holdings, and my financial trusts for over 15 years. He knows every single cent I have to my name, and he respects the quiet, dignified way I choose to live my life. I told him I needed to see him immediately. When I walked into his downtown Charlotte office, I did not look or act like a frail, confused old woman. I sat perfectly straight in the tufted leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk and told him exactly what I had overheard through the garden window. Mr. Harrison's face turned bright red with righteous anger. He has known me since Jamal was just a teenager, and he was utterly appalled by the sheer wickedness and cruelty of their plan. We wasted no time on idle chatter. I instructed him to pull every single financial record attached to the property and every credit account connected to my son and his wife. What we discovered during that hour-long meeting made my blood run even colder than before. Lauren had not just been planning to throw me into a state-run facility. She had already been making aggressive moves to steal from me. Mr. Harrison turned his computer monitor toward me and pointed to a long series of denied financial applications. Lauren had been desperately trying to take out a massive home equity line of credit, attempting to secure a loan of hundreds of thousands of dollars against the sheer value of my estate. Because Jamal was listed as a primary tenant on their rent-to-own agreement, Lauren somehow believed she could manipulate the paperwork to borrow against the property itself. She had submitted forged documents to various banks, trying to cleverly bypass the property management company she thought owned the house. What that foolish, entitled woman did not know, and what she could never have possibly comprehended, was that the corporate entity holding the deed was entirely owned and controlled by me. She was trying to rob a faceless corporation, completely unaware that she was actually trying to rob the very woman she treated like dirt. Mr. Harrison looked at me with absolute disbelief, shaking his head at her monumental audacity and criminal stupidity. I told him to meticulously document every single forged signature and every denied loan application. We were building an ironclad arsenal, a mountain of undeniable legal evidence so incredibly high that Lauren would never see the sun again once it collapsed on top of her. I spent the next few days playing my part to absolute perfection. When I walked into the main house to visit my sweet grandson, Jordan, I made sure to walk just a little bit slower. I let my hands tremble slightly when I poured my morning coffee. I even asked Lauren the exact same question twice in one afternoon, watching the smug, triumphant smile spread across her face as she convinced herself her wicked plan was working flawlessly. She truly thought I was rapidly losing my mind, but my mind had never been sharper in my entire 65 years on this earth. I was simply giving her the performance of a lifetime, lulling her into a false sense of absolute security. The climax of their vile little scheme arrived on a gloomy, rainy Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my suite reading a novel when a loud, aggressive knock rattled my front door. I opened it to find Lauren standing on my porch with her brother Travis. Travis was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, holding a plastic clipboard, and desperately attempting to look like an official person of authority. Lauren had a thick manila folder clutched tightly to her chest, her chin raised high with that familiar, sickening entitlement. I invited them inside, offering them a seat at my small dining table with a gracious, welcoming smile. Travis cleared his throat, sweating slightly under his collar, trying to sound authoritative and deeply concerned. He introduced himself using a fake last name and claimed he was a senior social worker evaluating my living conditions for the county health department. He actually had the nerve to look me directly in the eye and tell me that he had received anonymous reports of my declining mental health and highly unsafe behavior. He stated that it was his professional medical opinion that I was no longer fit to live independently in the suite. I sat there, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching this unemployed, perpetually failing businessman pretend to be a medical professional in my own home. Then Lauren stepped forward, playing the role of the heartbroken, exhausted caregiver to absolute perfection. She placed the manila folder on the table and slid it slowly toward me. She spoke to me as if I were a slow, confused toddler, using a syrupy, patronizing tone that made my stomach physically churn. She told me that she and Jamal loved me so much, but they simply could no longer provide the intense round-the-clock medical care I desperately needed. She opened the folder and pulled out a glossy, depressing brochure for a grim, underfunded, state-run nursing facility located 2 hours away in a desolate part of the county. Right beside the brochure was a typed document. It was a completely fraudulent eviction notice, drawn up to look like an official legal decree from the property management company. Lauren leaned across the table, her eyes completely devoid of warmth, and told me that I had exactly 1 week to pack my bags voluntarily. She said if I made a fuss, caused a scene, or refused to sign the intake paperwork for the nursing home, she and Travis would be forced to call the authorities to have me physically removed from the premises for my own safety. She implicitly threatened to have me dragged out of my own home in handcuffs if I did not silently comply with her outrageous demands. I looked down at the fake eviction notice, and then at the brochure for the miserable institution where she fully planned to leave me to rot until I died. I felt the overwhelming, powerful urge to laugh right in her smug face, to pull out my phone and show her the millions of dollars sitting securely in my investment accounts. But I remembered my ancestral wisdom. I kept my face entirely blank, allowing my lower lip to quiver just a fraction of an inch to sell the illusion. I reached out with a shaky hand, picked up the brochure and nodded my head in quiet, defeated submission. I looked up at Lauren with wide, fearful eyes and thanked her for caring so much about my well-being. I told her in a frail whisper that I did not want to be a burden anymore and that I would start packing my belongings immediately. The sheer joy and wicked triumph that erupted on Lauren's face was truly something to behold. She practically skipped out of my suite, linking arms with Travis, whispering excitedly about the expensive contractors they were going to call to completely remodel my rooms into an entertainment space. The very second my front door clicked shut and their footsteps faded down the concrete walkway, the fragile old woman routine vanished completely. I stood up, walked deliberately over to the trash can, and dropped their ridiculous fake documents right into the garbage. Then I picked up my phone and called Mr. Harrison. I did not shed a single tear. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I spoke with the cold, commanding, and absolute authority of a woman who was taking her entire life back. I instructed my lawyer to completely and permanently disinherit my son Jamal from my estate, my financial trusts, and my life insurance policies. Every dime, every property, and every investment I had, meticulously built over 45 years, was to be locked down into a highly secure, ironclad trust fund established solely for my grandson Jordan. I made absolutely certain that the trust was legally untouchable by his parents, ensuring they could not access a single penny until Jordan turned 30 years old. I then ordered Mr. Harrison to prepare the official legally binding eviction notices for Jamal and Lauren, demanding they vacate my property immediately. But I was not finished. For 3 long years, I had been quietly subsidizing their luxurious fake lifestyle behind the scenes. Jamal genuinely thought he had negotiated a brilliant financial deal on his luxury car, completely unaware that I was making a massive supplementary payment directly to the dealership every single month, just to keep his payments low. Lauren truly thought her exorbitant credit card limits were a reflection of her stellar personal credit, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the anonymous guarantor, silently paying down her excessive balances, so my son would not end up drowning in bankruptcy court. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged directly into my private banking portal. With a few deliberate, deeply satisfying clicks of my mouse, I systematically severed every single financial cord, tying them to my wealth. I cancelled the automatic drafts for Jamal's luxury vehicle. I legally revoked my guarantor status on Lauren's premium credit cards, knowing the banks would instantly freeze her accounts. I stopped the secret payments covering the inflated property taxes and the exorbitant homeowner association fees that they could never afford on their own salaries. I cut them off entirely, leaving them to freefall blindly into the catastrophic financial ruin they had selfishly created for themselves. I closed my laptop, sat back in my chair, and took a long, refreshing sip of my sweet tea. Feeling an overwhelming sense of profound, liberating peace. They had given me 1 week to pack my bags. They were currently busy planning a massive, expensive catered dinner party for all their high society friends to celebrate their upcoming home renovations. They truly thought they had successfully outsmarted a broke, foolish, declining old widow. They had absolutely no idea that the storm of the century was already gathering right above their heads, and I was going to bring it crashing down on them in front of every single person they were trying so desperately to impress. The evening of Lauren's grand dinner party arrived with the obnoxious clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the loud, booming laughter of people who genuinely believed they owned the world. From the quiet sanctuary of my suite, I could hear the catered staff bustling around my property. The rich, savoury scent of expensive roasted lamb and truffle herb potatoes wafted through the ventilation vents, all paid for by premium credit cards, that I had already secretly instructed the banks to freeze. I sat in my favourite plush armchair, dressed impeccably in a sharp-tailored navy blue pantsuit I had purchased specifically for this occasion. I checked the time on the antique grandfather clock ticking softly in the corner of my room. The trap was perfectly set. Mr. Harrison had coordinated every single detail with the local sheriff's department. I just had to wait for the exact right moment to drop the heavy hammer of justice. Through the thin, adjoining wall, I heard Travis loudly clinking his glass with a silver spoon. He was calling the dining room to order for a grand toast. I slowly stood up, smoothed down my jacket, and picked up my worn leather handbag. Inside that humble bag were the keys to my kingdom and the solid iron locks to their prison. I walked with my head held high down the short hallway and pushed open the heavy double doors leading into the main formal dining room. The sight before me was absolutely nauseating. Lauren was seated at the head of my custom mahogany dining table, wearing a shimmering designer silk dress, surrounded by 20 of her most pretentious country club friends. Travis was standing proudly beside her, holding his champagne flute high in the air. He was right in the middle of a pompous speech, thanking his amazing sister and brother-in-law for opening their beautiful home to him, and loudly boasting about the upcoming expensive renovations to the West Wing to create his new luxury bachelor pad. Jamal sat quietly next to Lauren, his eyes darting away nervously, playing the pathetic role of the obedient, spineless prop. When the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind me, the entire room fell dead silent. Travis stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in shock. 20 pairs of judgmental, highly confused eyes turned to stare directly at me. I walked calmly and deliberately into the center of the room. Lauren's face immediately contorted with absolute unhinged rage. She slammed her crystal flute onto the table, splashing champagne onto the pristine white linen, and marched aggressively over to the entryway closet. She yanked open the door, pulled out 2 heavy black garbage bags, and tossed them carelessly at my feet on the polished hardwood floors. She crossed her arms tight. A smug, wicked sneer painted across her face, and looked down at me as if I were nothing more than a stain on her designer rug. She announced to the entire room of her elite whispering friends that my time as a penniless charity case was officially over. She declared loudly that the mother-in-law suite was being repurposed for her brother, and I needed to be gone by sunset. She told me to take my trash bags and get to packing before she called the police to have me forcefully removed. She fully expected tears. She expected me to crumble to the floor and beg for a place to stay in front of her high society audience. Instead, I took a slow, calm sip of the sweet tea I had brought in with me. I reached into my worn leather handbag, pulled out the original, officially notarized property deed, and laid it flat on her expensive catered dinner table right next to her roasted lamb. I locked eyes with her, watched all the warm color rapidly drain from her face, and quietly informed her that I was the actual owner of this entire estate, and she had exactly until midnight to pack her things and get out. Lauren let out a sharp, mocking laugh, looking around frantically at her friends to see if they were in on the joke. But nobody was laughing. Jamal's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror as he instantly recognized the official state seal on the legal document. I reached back into my bag and pulled out the thick stack of highlighted bank statements and the highly illegal, fraudulent home equity line of credit applications we had intercepted. I threw them down on the table with a loud, resounding smack that made several guests physically jump in their seats. I looked directly at Lauren and her freeloading brother, my voice ringing out with decades of hard-earned, unshakable authority. I told her she was a monumental fool. I told her that the corporate entity she had been sending her ridiculously low, subsidized rent checks to was owned and operated entirely by me. I explained loudly and clearly so every single one of her gossiping friends could hear the absolute truth that I had paid for this sprawling luxury house in pure cash. I told her that the expensive luxury vehicles sitting in the driveway were financed completely under my name. I revealed that I had been secretly paying down her exorbitant credit card debt for 3 long years just to keep my son out of a humiliating bankruptcy court. I pointed to the expensive crystal chandelier shining above our heads, the gourmet food on their plates, and the very velvet chairs they were sitting on. And I announced that every single thing in this room was bought and paid for by the sweat, blood, and tears of a black woman she had dared to treat like dirt. The silence in the dining room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Lauren's wealthy friends were staring at her with wide, horrified eyes, shifting incredibly uncomfortably in their seats, as the grand illusion of her wealth shattered into a million pathetic pieces right in front of them. Lauren began to scream in hysterical denial, her face turning a blotchy, furious red. She yelled that I was a lying, crazy old bat, lunging forward to grab the legal documents to tear them up. But Jamal finally stood up. His knees were physically shaking so hard he could barely support his own weight. He looked down at the irrefutable bank statements, then looked up at me, his face glistening with cold, terrified sweat. He fell to his knees right there on the expensive dining room rug. My son, the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth and comfort to protect, grabbed the hem of my tailored pantsuit and began to weep uncontrollably. He begged for my forgiveness, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. He sobbed that he had made a terrible mistake, that he had been stressed and terribly confused by his wife, and that he loved me more than anything. I looked down at him with absolutely no pity left in my maternal heart. I told him in a voice as cold as ice that he did not love me. He loved the comfort and the illusion of wealth far more than he loved his own mother. I told him that he had willingly traded his integrity, his family, and his rightful inheritance for a toxic, wicked woman who viewed him as nothing but a human stepping stone. I gently but firmly pulled my leg out of his grasp and took a deliberate step back, severing the bond between us. Lauren was shrieking uncontrollably now, demanding that Travis do something demanding, that Jamal stand up and throw me out of the house. But Travis was slowly backing away toward the kitchen doors, his cowardly eyes darting toward the exits, suddenly realizing that his lavish free ride had just violently crashed and burned. Right at that exact moment, 3 heavy, incredibly authoritative knocks echoed loudly from the solid oak front doors. The heavy brass handles turned, and the local county sheriff walked straight into the grand foyer, flanked by 2 stern-armed deputies. Mr. Harrison had timed the arrival absolutely flawlessly. The sheriff bypassed the stunned, whispering dinner guests and walked directly up to a hyperventilating Lauren. He did not care about her expensive silk dress or her high society friends. He handed her a thick manila envelope containing the official legally binding eviction notice, making it clear it was effective immediately due to hostile and criminal actions against the legal property owner. But he was far from finished. The sheriff then pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He informed Lauren that she was under arrest for multiple counts of felony financial fraud, gross identity theft, and attempted bank fraud related to the forged home equity loan applications she had submitted to the bank. Lauren's screams turned into feral, panicked shrieks as the deputies firmly grabbed her arms and snapped the cold metal cuffs securely around her wrists. She kicked and thrashed, begging her wealthy friends to call a high-priced lawyer. But her guests were already grabbing their designer coats and rushing out the side doors, utterly mortified to be associated with such a massive criminal spectacle. I stood tall and completely composed in the center of my beautiful home, watching as the deputies marched a sobbing, deeply humiliated Lauren out the front door, her designer heels dragging awkwardly across the pavement. Travis attempted to sneak out the back patio doors, but the sheriff intercepted him, handing him a formal trespassing notice and giving him exactly 10 minutes to gather his belongings and vacate my property before he too was arrested and thrown in the back of a squad car. Jamal was left sitting on the hard concrete curb outside my front gates, weeping heavily into his hands, completely stripped of his luxury cars, his fake high society lifestyle, and the toxic wife who had entirely ruined him. I walked to the front of the house and locked the heavy oak doors, shutting him out in the cold evening air without a single ounce of remorse. I felt absolutely no guilt. He was a grown man who had made his bed with deceit, and now he had to lie in it. In the peaceful, quiet weeks that followed, that glorious evening of reckoning, the massive house finally became a true home. I hired a professional cleaning crew to scrub away every lingering trace of Lauren and Travis from the property. I reclaimed the massive, luxurious master bedroom in the main house, filling it with the warm, comforting scents of vanilla and the beautiful African art pieces I had kept hidden in storage for years. I sat down with Mr. Harrison and completely restructured my entire financial empire. I set up a massive, ironclad trust fund solely for my beautiful grandson, Jordan. The money was securely designated for his college education, his first home, and his future, with strict, impenetrable legal clauses that ensured neither Jamal nor Lauren could ever touch a single cent of it. I was granted full legal custody of Jordan, while Lauren sat in a county jail cell awaiting trial for federal bank fraud. And Jamal struggled to find a cheap run-down apartment on a single UN-subsidized income. Watching my grandson play happily in the massive sunlit backyard, without the constant fear of being yelled at, was the absolute greatest reward I could have ever asked for. We planted a brand new garden together, and his innocent, joyful laughter finally filled the empty, echoing spaces of the grand estate. I finally allowed myself to truly enjoy the beautiful fruits of my lifelong labor. I hired a private chef to cook my meals, booked a luxury month-long cruise to the Caribbean, and started deeply living the golden years I had so fiercely earned. I realized that my decades of sacrifices had not been in vain. They had simply been misdirected toward the wrong people. I had finally learned the ultimate, undeniable lesson of motherhood and womanhood. You cannot buy genuine loyalty, and you must never, ever shrink yourself to make ungrateful, entitled people comfortable in the sacred spaces you built with your own blood, sweat, and tears. As I look back on everything that happened, my heart is filled with a profound and unshakable peace. I wanted to share this very personal journey with you today, because I know I am not the only woman out there who has faced this specific kind of heartbreak. As mothers, especially as women who have worked our entire lives to build a solid foundation for our children, we are taught from a very young age to pour from our cups until we are completely empty. We are conditioned by society to believe that a good mother's love means endless sacrifice, endless forgiveness, and endless suffering in absolute silence. We are constantly told to shrink ourselves so our children can stand tall even when they are standing right on our own backs to do it. But let me tell you a hard, undeniable truth that took me 65 years to finally understand. Never give away your crown while you are still sitting on the throne. True family respects you for the person you are. They do not just tolerate you for the financial resources you can provide. When you build a beautiful life with your own blood, sweat, and tears, you have the absolute right to live out your golden years surrounded by peace, dignity, and genuine love. You do not owe your hard-earned wealth to anyone who treats you like an inconvenience or a stubborn obstacle. Setting strict boundaries with the very people you brought into this world is undoubtedly one of the most painful things a mother can ever do, but sometimes it is the only way to save yourself from total destruction. I had to let go of the son I thought I raised so I could properly protect the innocent grandson who truly needed me, and most importantly, so I could finally protect myself. Now I am looking out at my beautiful blooming garden, watching my grandson play safely in the warm sunlight, and I know without a single shadow of a doubt that I made the exact right choice. If you have ever found yourself in a similar situation, if you have ever had to set an incredibly hard boundary to protect your own mental peace and preserve your own dignity, I want to hear from you. I want to know your stories and how you found the bravery to reclaim your life. Hit that like button right now and please subscribe to the channel for more stories of women finally standing firm in their power and taking back what is rightfully theirs. We are building a beautiful community of strong, resilient survivors here, and your voice truly matters to me. Tell me down in the comments, where are you watching this story from today? And exactly what time is it there? I read every single one of your messages, and it brings me so much joy to know how far these life lessons travel. God bless you all, stay strong, and always remember your worth.